What an evening this is, huh? We are live. We are live here on YouTube, looking to have a good conversation. It is now officially in the USA. It has just passed from June 16th to June 17th.
We are live.
I'll better get rid of that echo. But it's good to know that we are here. We are having our conversation. What a day. What a day. So, how are folks doing here? How's the night going? A lot to talk about. I wanted to begin by talking about what's gotten a lot of press lately, which is the situation on the border of the United States, on the U.S. border. Every day, this has been the case for the last decade at least, we have had, corpses that are turning up. People are trying to cross the border, not making it, dying of exhaustion, dying of heat in the desert, dead bodies along the U.S. border. Furthermore, there has been an epidemic of children who are trying to cross the U.S. border as well. Their parents send them across the border. Things are so bad in Mexico, Central America, the parents send them across the border. Hundreds of people, if not thousands, are dying every year trying to get across the border to the United States. There's actually a very good documentary, La Bestia, that talks about the train that a lot of people take through Mexico to try and reach the United States. This is not a passenger train. This is a train that they are jumping onto and essentially riding as it goes through Mexico up towards the U.S. border.
The parents send them across the border.
People die.
Hundreds of people, if not thousands, are dying every year trying to get across the border to the United States.
There we go. Make sure we don't have an echo there. But yes, there is an epidemic of mass death of people trying to cross the U.S. border and dying. And this is happening all across, and it has been the case for the last, decades or so. And I interviewed Gloria Rubik. I interviewed her for a story I did back when I was with Press TV, and she described it and how there's actually an institute that determines the DNA of these people who are trying to get across the border so their family can know what happened to their relative. And it's just, it's very, very, very tragic what's happening, and this is a humanitarian catastrophe. We hear about the migrants who are crossing into Europe, trying to get across the Mediterranean from North Africa. Every so often one of these boats will sink, and tens, if not hundreds, of people will die. I mean, this is a real mass epidemic of people that can no longer live in their country of origin, are trying desperately to get to the Western countries, which are more prosperous, and dying in mass. And now lately, we've heard about what's going on, and how these children that are at the border are basically being rounded up because they are children and they're being held in facilities. What bothers me is that it's like mainstream media has just discovered this. People were concerned about the situation facing immigrant workers. They voted for Barack Obama. During the Obama administration, the deportations actually doubled. And the mass crisis on the U.S. border of people trying to get across and just, it's a stream of people dying, all of that continued. And then Trump played into what I think is one of the worst aspects of Trump's, kind of played into bigoted feelings among the population. The idea that all the people that are coming across the border are criminals and murderers. I believe, in his opening to his campaign, he said they're rapists, they're murderers, just said a lot of vile things about these folks that are coming across the border, kind of played up people's fear and bigotry. But the thing is, this is an ongoing issue, and the reality is that in Central America, in South America, there are a number of countries that have just been demolished by capitalism. I mean, right now, all over Mexico, people are growing heroin. Well, it used to be that in Mexico, people were growing corn, people were growing wheat, people were growing standard crops, but then they signed NAFTA, and that allowed the USA to start importing food into Mexico, and the U.S. market undermined, subsidized by U.S. tax dollars, basically undermined the Mexican agricultural market and basically destroyed Mexican farmers. Mexico has very little of its own domestic agriculture now, and thousands and thousands of Mexican farmers have lost their land. But now, in light of the destruction of the legitimate, upfront Mexican agriculture, you have the growth now of heroin. Poppy fields are growing in Mexico as because here in the USA, there's been this growth of the heroin addiction spurned by an overprescription of opioid medications. A lot of Americans desperately want to get heroin now because they've become addicted to opioids. They got from the doctor, they got prescribed opioids, they got hooked on it. So now all over Mexico, we have the drug cartels that were normally handling cocaine and the smuggling of cocaine into the United States. Now they're getting in on the heroin trade. So this is just a big, big mess that we've got in the U.S. border, and it's a global crisis of mass migration. People can't stay in their own country. The third world economies have been demolished by global capitalism, and so people are fleeing in mass, and so we have this crisis of mass migration. So let's talk about it. Now, the right wing plays up this idea that we should build a big giant wall and that we should be terrified of immigrants. Immigrants are the enemy. Immigrants are criminals. They're dangerous. We got to build a big giant wall. The left wing says, oh, this crisis of mass migration, it's not a crisis. It's great, right? Let's have a big welcome the refugees parade. Let's celebrate it. This is the American dream coming to a new land. What? You think there's a problem with this? You think there's a problem that all these people can't live in your homes? You're a racist. Shut up. So it's like both sides don't want to address the issue, which is the global capitalist crisis. The left thinks it's great, that people can't live in their homes and are piling into the United States. The right, on the other hand, thinks that we should hate these people and be afraid of them and build big giant walls and have ICE kicking down people's doors and have these people live in a state of fear and build big giant walls. Neither of those are addressing the underlying issue, which is that a system based on profits and the rule of global monopolists and bankers is unsustainable. And we have a global economy set up to serve Wall Street and London, and that this is not a sustainable way of the world continuing to function. And as long as the right keeps, building up this bigotry and fear, as long as the left keeps celebrating and ignoring that there's a real problem and that all these people can't live in their homes and that this is a big problem, as long as we have these two sides that are just kind of feeding off each other's delusion. One side is preaching, phobia and bigotry. The other side is basically just at the same time is just celebrating it and is in denial that there's an actual crisis going on. As long as both the left and the right are in this state of denial and just kind of playing off these emotional narratives, the left being happy about mass migration, the right being bigoted and afraid of mass migration, until we address the underlying issue, the problems are not going to get solved. And because I talk that way on the left, people think I'm on the right. Well, I'm not on the right. I am against the ICE raids and deportations. I'm against criminalizing the immigrants. I think this wall idea that Trump is doing is really, really stupid and a waste of time. I think that this separation of families that's happening at the border is unacceptable. But I'm also not going to cheer for the crisis of mass migration. It is not a good thing that people can't live in their homes. It is not a good thing that people are crossing the border every day, risking their lives. That things are that bad that they're crossing the border every day, desperately trying to get into the United States. So left and right, it's dangerous. Welcome back, Pro Gun Red, by the way. It's been a long time since you've been on there. Welcome back. Glad to see you on there. What do we got here in the comments feed? Social democracy is not Democrats currently. No wonder people want opioids. Neoliberalism is the Democratic Party. Well, the person who said that is passive. Let's be clear about what neoliberalism is, right? And a lot of people think neoliberalism is related to political liberalism. And liberal in American politics, we talk about liberals and conservatives. So people think that that among conservatives we have neoconservatives. So people think the opposite of a neoconservative is a neoliberal. No, neoliberalism is an economic theory. It's the writings of Milton Friedman, Friedrich von Hayek, Ayn Rand, the idea that the role of the state should be minimal. It's economic liberalism or capitalism in markets, and it's kind of an accelerated brand of it. Neoliberalism is the privatization of the military, and the idea that private military contractors can do what soldiers used to do. It's private prisons. Neoliberalism is an economic theory. And now Frank Vanderbilt is asking me what are my thoughts on AMLO. Well, that's, folks who don't know AMLO, that's Lopez Obrador, who is the populist candidate who is running for president in the Mexican elections. He's run a few times before. Many people believe the previous elections in which he ran were stolen. I think there's a very good chance he could win this time. He's ahead in the polls, and on top of that, among the elites of Mexico, there is a new division with the United States. The United States is not playing the role in Mexican politics that it once did. And because of that, I think Lopez Obrador has a better chance this time than he did the previous two times. And many people think he actually won those previous two times. So I'm quite excited about it. And let's remember that Bolivarianism in Venezuela began as a referendum on neoliberalism and their relationship with the United States. That's the reality. Now, Lady Ravenhair says the Democrats and Social Democrats are not the left. The left are the communists, like Party of Communist USA, who do discuss capitalism. Very good, Lady Ravenhair. The Communist Party of Communist USA. I understand that's an attempt to kind of resurrect the politics that once made the Communist Party of the United States strong. I think that's good for them. And I saw members of the parties of communists at the World Festival of Youth and Students in Sochi, and good folks doing a good thing. And that there is a realization that the politics of William Z. Foster and Gus Hall, Eugene Dennis, Paul Robeson, that these politics need to be revived. There needs to be class solidarity. So I'm glad you pointed that out, Lady Raven here. What else are we hearing here? What's your opinion of Bernie Sanders supporters? It's funny. For years, when I was a left-wing activist, I would shout, break with the Democratic Party, and I'd be urging people not to support the Democratic Party. And what I was shouting about is actually happening right now. Millions and millions and millions of people who are Democrats, who are in the Democratic Party, have come to the conclusion, because they supported Bernie Sanders and saw those leaked emails, have discovered basically that the Democratic Party is a rigged machine, and there is a fight within the Democratic Party. Your average Democrat thinks like Bernie Sanders. However, the people who run the urban machines, right, the Nancy Pelosi's of San Francisco, here in New York, we've got, the forces that are gathered around, Bill de Blasio and the Clinton machine, Hillary Clinton's kind of allies here in New York City. In Chicago, you've got the Daley machine and Rahm Emanuel. These corrupt urban machines that are the basis of Democratic Party power, they espouse a politics very, very different than what most people who are Democrats think. Most people who are Democrats think like Bernie Sanders. They're not, actual socialist revolutionaries. They advocate, basically, that people get health care and education and progressive income taxes on the rich and regulation of Wall Street. But that is not acceptable to these forces that have kind of seized control of the Democratic Party. The Clinton machine, you can go back to the 80s with the rise of the Democratic Leadership Council, which was an NGO, a nonprofit set up by Bill Clinton, among others, getting all kinds of funding to take the Democratic Party in a neoliberal free market direction and to just, purge whatever was left of the Roosevelt wing of Democratic Party politics. And a lot of people, Jerry Brown, who is now the governor of California, he was in a debate with Bill Clinton, and he basically said that that Bill Clinton represented an element that was seizing control of the Democratic Party and the DLC, and he spoke against it. Jerry Brown was holding on to some of those more liberal populist politics that the Democrats were actively purging, and that Clinton was on the front lines of purging. Very interesting to watch those old debates between Jerry Brown and Bill Clinton, and Jerry Brown was trying to hold on to some of the politics the Democratic Party, just the last remnants of the Roosevelt Democratic Party, and the Clintons, the rise of Bill Clinton to power was very much the final purging of whatever was left of that. So it's very interesting to talk about that. But a lot of Democrats are waking up to realize that the Democratic Party has this domination by these forces that are tied in with big business that don't agree with their agenda. And so this is a very important fight. And so to just stand on the outside of it, to not have a relationship, I think that the Bernie Sanders movement is one of the most important movements, probably the most important movement going on in the United States right now. People in the Democratic Party saying the machine is rigged, fighting the Democratic Party leadership, fighting the corrupt urban machines. It's interesting to think about. So, you got your two parties in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats. Now, the Democratic Party, that was the party of Tammany Hall. Thomas Jefferson was involved in starting them up. They were originated in New York City, and they were always kind of the party of corrupt urban politics. However, the Republican Party very interestingly, the Republican Party began as a radical left-wing political party. They took their name from republicanism, which was the Spring of Nations in 1848, when you had these uprisings all throughout Europe. There was the republicanism, or the red republicanism, right? The Communist Manifesto was published in Germany as people that were participating in the Republican uprising, trying to create a German state. So there you go. Republicans have this radical origin, and the Republicans were the party of the small farmers. I actually have a book behind me. I'll just grab it right here about the origins of the Republican Party. Let me just get it down here. This is about the origins of the Republican Party. Free soil, free labor, free men. That's what the Republican Party was known for when they originated, and they were a party. They were the party of organized labor. They were the party of abolitionists who opposed slavery, and they were the party of the small farmers, what they called the free soilers, who were going out to Kansas and going out to Nebraska, and they were starting small independent farms. And that the Republicans actually, it's interesting, in the original years of the Republican Party, the Marxists in the United States, there weren't very many of them, but they were aligned with the Republican Party. The New York Tribune, which was a newspaper in New York City that was the Republican Party newspaper of New York City, they were aligned with Karl Marx. Karl Marx was their London correspondent. He wrote articles for them. And, August Willich and Joseph Wedemeyer, important military leaders during the U.S. Civil War, they were Republicans. And it was, these small farmers didn't believe in slavery. They opposed the plantation system of the South. And they had this kind of religious, this religious feeling that they thought the urban machines of Chicago and New York City were corrupt, and these were these corrupt machines, and it was kind of the free soilers, and the origin of the Republican Party was kind of radical. That changed, obviously, but what's interesting is nowadays the Republicans are the conservative, more right-wing party. The Democrats are the more liberal party, but the constituencies are about the same, except for the South. Now, the South used to be in the hands of the Democrats. They called it the Solid South, and that was the age of Jim Crow, when the Jim Crow South was aligned with the Democratic Party. When the northern wing of the Democratic Party supported the civil rights movement. Oh, I see Mark Phelan is here. Shout out to Mark Phelan, a longtime organizer and activist. He said but let me finish this point about the switch. Still, the Republicans are very much the party of rural folks, of Protestants, and small town farmer folks, people that are very religious. The Democrats are still the party of corrupt urban machines. Other than the South switching, when you get down to it, the parties still represent the same constituencies. It's just that rural folks in the USA are no longer the free soilers who are opposing slavery and want, free land, free labor, free men, and all that. Now, the rural folks are much more conservative and right-wing, whereas the urban areas, we've seen an empowerment. There's been a civil rights movement. There's been black nationalism, and now the urban areas espouse much more liberal politics. But one thing that I think is very interesting is, it's very, a lot of people have observed that one thing about the Republicans is that despite the fact that their beliefs are completely, right-wing, you got Michelle Bachmann, and you got, this very, very extreme views, at the same time, a lot of people respect the Republicans more because they actually believe what they're saying. And as much as people don't agree with Republican policy, there's no doubt that, Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin, these people believe what they're saying. They believe every word of it. They think it's all true. They're espousing this free market, Christian fundamentalist ideology, but they believe it. They believe it. Whereas the Democratic Party, they talk a very progressive line. They talk against racism. They talk like they're for the unions and for the common people. They don't believe it. And the Democrats come across as much less sincere. And so it's an interesting back and forth. But let me get back to my friend Mark Phelan. What's Mark Phelan saying here? Mark Phelan says, is splitting California into 3 separate states crazier than Trump getting elected president? That's interesting. For a long time, conservatives in Northern California have advocated separating with Southern California, with Hollywood, San Francisco, LA, and forming what they call the Jefferson State. They feel like California is dominated by the population concentration in the South, and that conservatives in California aren't represented, so there's been this call to separate California. When I was out there, I interviewed people from the California independence movement, Cal Exit they call it, and they pointed out to me, yeah, well, there's been this movement in the northern part of California to actually break California into 2 states. I'd never heard of 3 states, but into 2 states. But now there's also Cal Exit, and that, there are people that want California independence. And now with the rise of Silicon Valley, with the fact that California's economy is doing much better than the rest of the country, that California itself is a very, very prosperous state. There are a lot of people in California who feel like, why should we be part of this? And especially when they don't agree with Donald Trump and they don't agree with the red states, and they're very pro-gay marriage, and you know, they just don't agree with it. We've got California actually imposing sanctions on other U.S. states, economic penalties on them if they don't agree with gay marriage and they don't agree with their climate change laws. And so, yes, California, something's going on there. So, you know, Silicon Valley, California, there is, you know, there are calls for separatism. I know Elon Musk is, you know, the billionaire. He advocates California independence. So it's an interesting theory. Will it ever happen? I mean, legally speaking, I mean, it's never been explicitly stated, but we did fight a civil war, and the outcome of the Civil War was basically states have no right to leave. You know, I mean, the South tried to secede from the USA in order to preserve slavery, and when they did that, we fought a war. 500,000 Americans died, probably more than that if you count civilian casualties. And from then on, it's been basically assumed that the USA is like a gang. You enter the USA and you don't leave. You cannot leave the United States. You become a U.S. state and you're stuck. Now, there have been a number of U.S. territories that have been granted independence. The Philippines was at one point a U.S. territory. You know, there's been other U.S. territories that have gotten independence. However, once you're a U.S. state, it seems like the way things have been written, you can't leave. But there have been people, you know, I mean, there have been other states that have called for independence. Vermont, for a long time, was talking about independence. Vermont is very liberal. That's Bernie Sanders' state. You know, you've got a lot of, like, hippies, you know, and, you know, people that are into New Age stuff and yoga and environmentalism in Vermont. And there was a Vermont separatist movement for a while. There's, you know, and there's now California separatism is going on. So there you go. I mean, all kinds of stuff is happening. Oh, I didn't know that, Mark. Mark is telling me that there was a ballot initiative, but it was ignored by Congress. Did not know that. Very, very interesting. So what else is happening in the world? You know, so many different things to talk about on here. You know, it's midnight. It has just become Sunday here in New York City. I'm sitting here in my apartment, and it's not water self-sufficient, says Frank Vanderbilt about California. That's a very good point, Frank. That is a very good point. And that water wars, they're talking about that, and how, you know, how there is issues with water in different states. Very, very, very interesting, right? So if California were to break away, would they still be able to get water that flows in from other states, right? And water rights would suddenly be an issue now, wouldn't it, right? That's a very, very, very interesting point. Very, very interesting point. Now, the other thing that is in the news lately this week, well, let me see. Michael Parenti lived in Vermont for a very long time. I did not know that, but I did know that Michael Parenti, he had written a lot about Bernie Sanders in his original years. In fact, he wrote about how there was more publicity given to David Duke when he lost when he was running for office than Bernie Sanders when he actually won. Bernie Sanders, who was running on a platform of being a democratic socialist, he barely got any media attention. Meanwhile, at the same time, David Duke, whenever he would run for anything, he got media attention. I read that essay by Michael Parenti. It was very, very interesting. Now, the Colombian election. Well, you know, Petro, this kind of leftist and socialist in Colombia, he actually had a pretty strong showing. And for Colombia, that's a big deal. You know, for a long time, Colombia, you know, they've had that civil war with the FARC. And so because of that, you know, the people that aren't in FARC areas tend to be more conservative. But Petro, this mayor in Colombia, he ran in the elections. He did not win, but he did actually do quite well, and it shows that there is a base for left-wing politics now in Colombia. So there you go. Interesting stuff. What else is new in the world? What else is going on? You know, I have been following things, and I must say, you know, politics in the U.S. is getting weird and confusing. You know, I have the latest issue of The Economist that I got in the mail today. Take a look at this. Kim Jong-un. Right? Kim Jong-un. And The Economist, you read this. This is neoliberalism, right? This is the World Bank. This is Milton Friedman. This is the Wall Street economists. They are furious about Donald Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un, and they're calling it a win. They're saying that this is propaganda. You know, this has helped North Korea. This has helped the North Korean government. They can't stand it. They can't stand it. They are furious that this happened. They can't stand it. And you read this, and it's like, yeah, folks need to admit that there is a section of the ruling class that does not like Trump, and that there is a divide in the ruling class, and that, you know, I mean, Trump, I did not vote for Trump. I do not approve of his immigration policies. I do not approve of his support for the police state, his anti-Iran, ripping up the Iran deal. That was unbelievably backstabbing and a betrayal. But when it comes to Trump, when it comes to this Korea stuff, this is a good move. And in all honesty, I don't think Hillary Clinton would have done this. I really don't think she did. I almost feel like it might have been a trade. I feel like there might have been one section of American capital that was like supporting the Iran deal and another section that wanted us to sit down and negotiate with North Korea. And it was like a trade-off. And this was some kind of trade-off. He ripped up the Iran deal in exchange for sitting down with North Korea and possibly reaching a rapprochement. So we'll have to just see how this plays out, though. Let's remember, nothing is done at the end of the day, right? They haven't lifted the sanctions yet. Nothing has happened, right? The Iran deal, right? Things were starting to look good, and then Trump came in and ripped it all up. So, it ain't over till it's over, as they say. But I must say I felt really good. And the fact that Trump has canceled these war games, these provocative military exercises that the U.S. government carries out, every year, in which they practice the all-out nuclear destruction of North Korea, and it's like, imagine, right? You've got people running toward the border. We're going to stop, though. It's just an exercise. We're running right up there to the border. The planes are flying right up there to the border every year. Oh, but they stop, right? It's just a game, And then, of course, North Korea, they can't just have people provocatively acting that way, so they shoot off a missile, and it seems like almost every year we have a crisis on the Korean Peninsula. Well, now, we have Donald Trump stopping these provocative military exercises. Again, do you think Hillary Clinton would have done that? We're in a weird spot here where, there's divisions in the ruling class. We've got Trump, acting on behalf of one section of the ruling class, fighting against the others. He's with the Pentagon, but he's not getting along with the intel agencies. He's got, this specific, this constituency with Sheldon Adelson and the Netanyahu, Likud party wing of Israeli politics, and Trump is serving a specific wing of capital, and that enables him to do things that maybe not all of the majority of the ruling class are willing to support. And let's keep that in mind. And there's also struggles within the administration itself. It was pretty clear that Bolton and Pence did not want the meeting to happen. When they came out and made those comments about Libya, anyone who wanted that meeting to succeed would never have mentioned Gaddafi in a Libya scenario. So, it was pretty clear there were figures within the Trump administration who tried to prevent the meeting from happening. And then Pompeo is super supportive of the meeting, but Bolton, who was there, was one of these people that made the comments very publicly about Libya, like almost trying to sabotage the meeting. So let's remember that things are happening within the ruling class. There are contradictions. And yes, and Kinky is asking me, pointing out Jerry Brown supporting Hillary Clinton, and Jerry Brown's doing awful things in California. I'm not endorsing Jerry Brown. I'm just referring to his debates with Bill Clinton, in which he highlighted that Bill Clinton was leading a turn in the Democratic Party that he did not approve of. Jerry Brown is an interesting figure, and he was kind of, years ago he was almost kind of a Kucinich type, but he's significantly moved right wing. One thing that's happening in California right now is that homelessness is just skyrocketing. And basically what's happened is, in California, they've been releasing nonviolent drug offenders from prisons, left and right. People who are locked up for using drugs, they're saying it's a victimless crime, they're letting them out of jail. But they're not giving these people anything when they get out. They're not giving them housing. They're not giving them social programs. They certainly aren't giving them any jobs. And so all over Southern California, you have the homeless population just skyrocketing. You have people living in tent cities that are springing up, and you have this huge amount of homelessness in Southern California. And it's being written about, and we've got a mayor, there was a campaign for mayor in Los Angeles, and this is a big issue, right? All these homeless people in Southern California, and Southern California is much warmer than other parts of the United States, and so, in that way, it's a place that people can be homeless year-round. We're not going to freeze to death. Like, that happens here in New York City, by the way. I don't know. Talk about a condemnation. This is the richest city in the world. This is the city, of Wall Street. But every year, come wintertime, you see reports in the local press of people freezing to death. in subways. They'll, and people freezing to death in the wintertime here in New York City, right? So it's much better to be homeless in Southern California because at least in Southern California, it's warm all year round. You're not going to freeze to death. But they've got a big problem with homelessness now because all these people have been released. These nonviolent drug offenders have been released, but there's nothing for them when they get out. Very, very interesting times that we are living in. And there's this increasing fight between the Democratic Party and the forces aligned with the Democratic Party. I would say Silicon Valley is probably a part of that alliance, and Jerry Brown is with Silicon Valley and with Hillary Clinton against the Trump administration, which seems to be with the Pentagon. You got Jeff Sessions. So interesting things are happening. Very, very interesting things are taking place. There are divisions within American politics that are very, very, very deep. The whole world is going to fall, then what? I actually don't think the whole world is going to fall. I'm very, very optimistic. That's Budcat7 is saying to me, you think the whole world is going to fall. I don't think the whole world is going to fall. I think that there is something very, very exciting happening in the world today. You wouldn't hear anything about it in mainstream media. I've been there. I've seen it in the Eurasian hemisphere. And Eurasia, right? We're talking the area between Moscow and Beijing. We're talking about that whole section of the globe that you don't ever hear anything about. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. We're talking. There's something very exciting happening. Asil Toji, who is the head of the Nobel Peace Prize Commission. I saw him speak at an important think tank in Sochi in Russia, and he talked about how this is a golden era. This is a golden era in the Eurasian subcontinent. Whole areas are being lit up with electricity. Trains are running through Eurasia right now. Booming natural gas projects are taking place. There is an economic rebirth of Russia, of China, of Central Asia, of the Far East in Russia, a boom of farmers. Farmers are setting up all over Russia's Far East. There is an alternative on the global economy, and what China is doing right now with the Belt and Road Initiative is really unprecedented, right? I mean, they are building trains, they are building hospitals, they are building airports in Bangladesh, and there is this alternative rising on the global economy, and it's very, very big, and it's not limited to the Eurasian subcontinent, right? Zimbabwe, which is, that used to be Rhodesia until there was a revolution. The ZANU Revolutionary Party rose up, took power. Zimbabwe and China have just signed a deal. Zimbabwe is on the verge of having its own steel manufacturing industry. They're going to set up steel mills in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe, the Marxist-Leninist Party, the ZANU-PF, Zimbabwe African National Union, Patriotic Front, is on the verge of setting up a state-run steel industry in Zimbabwe in coordination with China. That's huge. That has not happened before. That's very, very big. So many things are happening. China has been building hydroelectrical power plants all over the world. China at this point has the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant, which is the Three Gorges Dam. People all over the world are looking at it. No power plant in the world, no hydroelectrical power plant in the world produces this much electricity. It's just physically huge. There is a rising alternative. This what you might call it. What you might call the state-controlled economy, economies where the state sets economic activity, they are rising and they are flourishing all over the world as Western capitalism centered around Wall Street and London is just crashing and burning. Now, someone's asking me about, is the Ba'ath dream of Arab nationalism a dead one? I don't think it is. I think the Arab people right now. Unfortunately there is religious division, and the Saudis are really pushing this idea that Shia Muslims are your enemy. You should hate Shia. They're talking about the Shia crescent and the Shia apostates, and that's coming out of Saudi Arabia. This idea that there should be a religious war. Meanwhile, Iran and the Shia community is saying unity of all Muslims. So there's this attempt to divide the Arab people on the basis of religion, mainly coming from Saudi Arabia, Sunni versus Shia, but at the same time, the Arab people, that's the whole thing. Sykes-Picot, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was signed, it was a secret deal. And that's where all the borders in the Middle East come from. Iraq, Iran, where else? Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Yemen. Jordan, all these countries were drawn. They weren't, the people there didn't draw these countries, right? It wasn't like the people in the Arab world decided where these borders would be. France, Germany, Britain, the United States, they got together and they made a secret treaty, the Treaty of Sykes-Picot. And it was secret until the Russian Revolution. And after the Russian Revolution happened, then it was made public. It was one of the documents that the Bolsheviks, the Bolsheviks were the original WikiLeaks, I guess you could say. And they made public this document, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, that showed that the Germans and the British and the French, they were carving up the Arab world and determining what parts belonged to who. And as World War I was continuing, the idea was to defeat the Ottoman Empire, and then they were just going to carve up the Middle East among themselves. And that event eventually happened, and it was the Bolsheviks that brought us this secret treaty that the European colonizers had made, and that's where all these borders come from. And the slogans that the Baathists have used, they've talked about one Arab nation, and that was the goal. And for a while, it was on the verge of becoming a reality. You know, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Libya were unifying and all that, but it was broken apart. But I think there are a lot of people in the Arab world who do maintain that the Arabs, regardless Sunni, Shia, Christian, you know, that they're one people, you know, and there you go. So what else am I catching up on? Jared Piquet says, I wish America would join the Belt and Road Initiative. One day, when there is socialism or a progressive people's democracy, we can have infrastructure, healthcare, and a planned economy. You are exactly right, Jared. Exactly right. If we could join that Belt and Road Initiative, and we could get, some of those Chinese corporations, like, the most efficient, the best train corporation in the world. They make the best trains, the best railways, is the Chinese Central Railway Corporation. It's a government-controlled, state-controlled corporation in China. Right now, they make the fastest trains in the entire world. They go over 350 miles per hour. We should get them here in New York City tomorrow to start rebuilding our subways. Do you know how bad it is? I mean, I take the R train and the D train and then the 7 train to work. I mean, you wouldn't believe. I mean, there have been times I've waited. It's rush hour. The train station is piled full of people. I've waited 25 minutes for a train to come. 25 minutes. And you go to the developing world, you go to third world countries that are under, the trains aren't this bad. It doesn't have to be this way. It's like this because they want to get rid of it, right? People will often point to the subways and say, oh, that's government mismanagement. Well, the government does not control the subways in New York City. The MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, is a private corporation controlled by bankers connected to Goldman Sachs. It's a state-facilitated monopoly. And there are bankers who make profits off of our subways. Our subway system is not nationalized. Until the 1970s, we had a public subway system, but not anymore. The subway system is not nationalized, and it's a complete mess. We ought to nationalize the subways once again. We ought to get the Chinese Central Railway Corporation to come in here and fix it up, and we could have a really good subway system. We really could, I mean, so many developing countries in the world have better trains than we do. I mean, it's really unbelievable that we tolerate. New Yorkers are supposed to be tough, right? They got this reputation. New Yorkers, they never apologize for anything. They're like, look, I ain't gonna take it no more. I'm from New York. You talking to me like that? Oh, I ain't gonna take it no more, right? That's the attitude we're supposed to have. Well, why are we taking it? Why are New Yorkers taking it? These delays on the subways. It's just ridiculous. It is just plain ridiculous. Now, someone's asking, do you know if there's a West Coast pro-Belt and Road group like the one you've spoken about in New York? I don't know, actually. I haven't heard about it. But there's a lot of exciting things going on, and there's a lot of intellectuals who have talked about the Belt and Road. The U.S. media just downplays it. Occasionally you read articles condemning it, saying, oh, it's just a plot by the Chinese to take over the world, or something like that. But other than that, they don't talk about it. What the Belt and Road is doing all over the world is really, really amazing. And I mean, imagine if the Belt and Road came into the USA, right? I mean, imagine what we could do if we were building up our state sector, controlling our economy. I think the Belt and Road would lead to just a complete change in American politics, just a complete change. That's what I believe. But let's see what else our people are saying in the chat. I've got a lot of conversation going on here. This is a great time to do a live. I was worried that I wouldn't get anyone. It would be too late. It's kind of the opposite. So there you go. What's going on here? Everyone thought that Mnangagwa would be the Zimbabwean Pinochet, but thankfully doesn't seem to be the case. There you go. What else is going on here? Fukushima seems to have been leaking for 7 years and 3 months and 6 days. Well, there you go. I did not realize that. What's happening? Hey, Caleb, do you believe the moon landing was fake? I don't. Well, I'm not. I just don't. I haven't seen any sufficient evidence for that fact. I've heard that a lot of people believe it's fake, and I know it's widely believed in some countries in the world. I don't personally think it's fake. I think the moon landing happened. But I mean, media lies about a lot of things. I mean, we can be sure there was a lot of lies about the space program and stuff. But no, I have a feeling that the moon landing actually happened. From as far as I can tell, it looks pretty real to me. But I mean, what do I know? I mean, I'm not here to call anyone stupid if they disagree with me. Convince me otherwise. Send me information. I'm always anxious to learn. What's going on in the world here? I've got to look down at my phone. Just one quick second. Oh boy. There we are. Lady Ravenhair says they did Frederick. Oh, she's saying the Soviets have said the moon landing was fake. Oh, they did. Okay, well, I really, I'm not a moon landing expert. I can't speak on that, but it's something people are free to talk about. There we go. What is happening? A lot of people saying a lot of things here. Trying to build a huge dam so big it has slowed the Earth's rotation. I don't know about that. I would be quite shocked if a dam was slowing the Earth's rotation. That would really shock me. But there you go. Crazy times. We shall all focus on cutting the USA military budget. I would absolutely agree with that. I think that the U.S. military budget ought to be cut. It is bigger than so many countries in the world. Absolutely, it should be cut. What else is going on here? Where is OWS now, Caleb? They disappeared from the annals of history. Well, that's interesting. That's Budcat7 who's saying that. I was part of the Occupy movement, and I think that the Occupy movement was a good development. But I think it's important to point out that it wasn't a revolution. Most of the people there didn't have any real analysis, and it was basically just people getting together and saying that something's not right, and it was a pushback against the Tea Party mainly. That was, let's think back to 2011, right? Obama had just come in. The Tea Party was in there demanding cuts, demanding austerity. There'd been that debt ceiling crisis where the USA's credit rating had actually gone down. So a lot of young people like myself, they heard this call, for a rally on Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street. They went down and they got involved. And there were a lot of NGOs that were involved. A lot of Soros kind of groups were involved. And there were problems with it, but it was kind of the beginning. It was the awakening of a lot of people's consciousness. And I think, a lot of the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and all of them, gave their kind of wink and nod of approval, and MSNBC was promoting it mainly because this was a fight within the ruling class. This was Wall Street. This was divisions, right? And you had a fight. This was the Democrats pushing back against the Tea Party, and it was push and pull. But it was an awakening for a lot of people. A lot of people went down there. It was the first political thing they had ever done, the first kind of activism, and it was quite exciting. There you go. I mean, exciting times. Crazy world we live in. But anyhow, what else is new? What else is going on here? It was initially against the banks and the Tea Party, says Budcat7. Well, you're right. I mean, it was against the banks, but it never really had a clear program. You'll remember there were no demands. And they had this democracy procedure that was completely bizarre, where people were doing like twinkle fingers if they agreed, down twinkles if they disagreed, and block, and all these different hand gestures. And the way this kind of ultimately, it was supposed to be so democratic and transparent, but there was a lot of things that were very, very controlled. And there were, forces there that were kind of trying to move it in the direction they wanted, and wanted to make sure, that things went a certain way, and there was no question about it. Now, the CIA had a point in interfering with Australian politics. You can bet the CIA is interfering with politics all over the world. That's what they do. I mean, a lot of what the CIA does is try to craft public opinion around the world to be sympathetic with the United States, to promote forces who will be sympathetic to the United States around the world, and isolate forces that aren't. They try to work in the background. That's kind of the role that the CIA plays. So, that's why all this talk about political meddling, it's like the USA meddles in elections all over the world. There's all these allegations that Russia allegedly meddled in the U.S. elections. Well, but if you look at what's been happening, the reality is the USA has been meddling in elections all over the world, and the USA actually meddled in the 1996 election in Russia and did everything possible to make sure, and to make sure that that basically that the Boris Yeltsin candidate was victorious, and that the Communist Party and Zhuganov did not win the election. There was a huge amount of meddling from U.S. leaders to make that happen, and it was bragged about. I mean, Time magazine openly bragged about the fact that that the USA was working hard to make sure that Boris Yeltsin got reelected, even though his economic policies at the time were very, very unpopular, right? I mean, people in Russia could not, they were seeing their country be economically demolished. There was a huge, huge amount of people losing their jobs, losing their homes. I believe, something like 80,000 factories closed down. The overwhelming majority of Russia's farm system, closed down. They had to start importing food from the USA. The 1990s were an awful time in Russia. Then Jeffrey Sachs, the economist, was over there just overseeing, just the demolition of their economy and the privatization of things, factories closing down. And when that was happening, you had you at the same time you had what's it called? You had the USA trying to make sure that Boris Yeltsin was reelected. The idea, there's this allegation that maybe, possibly, allegedly, it's pretty outrageous, some of the stuff. You'd think they would have come up with something by now, but at the same time, the USA has been meddling in politics all over the world. It's loaded in hypocrisy, and mainstream media in the USA just doesn't acknowledge the reality. I remember watching Rachel Maddow, one of her episodes, and she said, imagine that the USA would have meddled in a Russian election like this. It's like, could they add a laugh track? I mean, the USA has been meddling. The USA is still meddling in Russian elections. Russia's laws didn't allow Navalny to run for office, and because of that, the U.S. media was doing everything they could to promote Alexander Navalny like he was some kind of hero. This is a guy's a convicted criminal. He's not allowed to participate in the elections. It's not a conspiracy by the Russian government. He just wasn't allowed to participate. And the USA did everything possible to publicize this opposition figure in Russia, this anti-Putin guy, and they did everything they could to promote him in U.S. media. Isn't that meddling in the elections? So there you go. All kinds of crazy things happening in the world today. But this upcoming election in Mexico is going to be interesting. I think there is a real possibility that Lopez Obrador may actually win the election. But, again, people say it's been stolen before, and it ain't over till it's over. Nothing's over till it's over. They're already playing up the idea that Russia is meddling on behalf of Lopez Obrador. I mean, they're already playing up the Russophobia. Like after the Trump election, they blamed interesting stuff. Jeffrey Sachs supported Sanders in 2016. Interesting. Is that the case? It doesn't surprise me. Jeffrey Sachs, he's a neoliberal economist. If you look at what he did in Bolivia, right, he presided over privatizing their water. If you look at what he did in Russia, he practices neoliberalism. He privatizes things, he breaks down, but he always tries to present himself in a more liberal light. He always tries to present himself as if he's, if he's just Mr. Friendly. He doesn't talk the way that Milton Friedman talks. He doesn't talk the way Ayn Rand talks. The policies basically are those policies. And that's the interesting thing about Jeffrey Sachs. And Jeffrey Sachs, he showed up at Occupy Wall Street and he was shaking people's hands. Oh, yes, I want to control Wall Street and all that. But Jeffrey Sachs, if you look at his practice, what he does, he is a neoliberal. He is a practitioner of neoliberal economic reforms. He demolished the economy of Bolivia and a number of Latin American countries. He demolished the economy of Russia in the 1990s. And he did it by shrinking the state sector, and his what he calls his micro loans policies have a similar results in India and other places. He is a practitioner of neoliberalism, but he frames it in this kind of Clinton-esque, friendly, liberal, liberal way of doing things. He's much more, it's very, very, very interesting. Like, he runs the World Happiness Index for the United Nations that measures happiness around the world. I think Jeffrey Sachs has worked with the Clinton Foundation, if I'm not mistaken. He has some direct ties with the Clinton Foundation, and the Clintons are not leftists, and they're not, that's what people don't get, is that that these liberal voices, now we've got, I made a rant about him. I don't want to get into it too much. But the Clinton folks, there's this new guy. I mean, he's not new, but the head of Starbucks is talking about running for president of the United States. The founder of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, and Howard Schultz. I mean, look at him. Now he's an advocate of pay equality, right? He wants women to be paid the same as men. He wants black, white, and Latino people to all be paid the same wages. He's an advocate of pay equality, but he's also an advocate of very, very low wages, right? So he wants them all to be paid low wages, right? Jeffrey, what's his name? Howard Schultz. He also advocates, he's a big advocate of gun control, right? Guns are dangerous. He wants gun control. He's an ecologist. He believes in ecology. But at the end of the day, he's a low-wage employer. And he does something really nasty to his employees. Talk to anyone who's ever worked at Starbucks. Ask them about a clopening. Ask them what a clopening is. That's where, they make people work a 6-hour shift and then close the store down, right? And then come back in 4 hours later and open it up and work another 6-hour shift. You can't sleep in 4 hours. You barely have got enough time to go home. Essentially what he's doing to his employees is he's making them work a good old-fashioned 12-hour day with a 4-hour break in the middle of it. This is the kind of thing that unions used to go on strike against. It was the May Day, the May Day holiday comes from the Haymarket uprising in Chicago, where people were demanding an 8-hour day. Well, Howard Schultz has figured out this loophole where he can make his employees work 12-hour days by closing and opening the stores. Clopenings, it's called. Just a nasty practice. This is a nasty fellow. And he treats his employees very, very badly. He's a low-wage employer. It's the service sector. It's baristas. There you go. What are your thoughts on Deng Xiaoping and his theories? Well, I mean, here's what a lot of people don't get. All right. So, let me give you a timeline of the rise of Deng Xiaoping. Mao Zedong dies in 1976. Zhou Enlai, another key leader of the Chinese Revolution, also died in 1976. Now, at the funeral of Zhou Enlai was considered to be one of the more moderate leaders of the Chinese Revolution. He was never attacked by the Gang of Four during the Cultural Revolution because he was so close to Mao. He was safe, but he was not considered to be a hardline extremist like the Gang of Four. And so, at the funeral of Zhou Enlai, there were, thousands of people who came out, students, intellectuals, people who just didn't like the Gang of Four in China. And they went out into Tiananmen Square. This is 1976, and it was called the Tiananmen Incident, a huge riot. And they were chanting anti-communist slogans, down with communism. They were breaking windows and overturning cars. It was just thousands and thousands of intellectuals in China who had just had it with the Gang of Four. The Gang of Four, and they identified the Gang of Four with all communism, and they had turned against communism. And the funeral of Zhou Enlai, this important leader of the Chinese Communist Party, it turned into a mass anti-communist riot. And this happened in 1976, right? And that all through China, during the time of the Gang of Four, it's the Gang of Four, this is basically, so all the students are deported from the cities into the countryside. They're in the countryside, and then almost every other week, the Gang of Four is having a down with something campaign. They had criticized Lin Biao, criticized Confucius. They're burning all the writings of Lin Biao, who was Mao's close associate. They're, ripping up the writings of Confucius. They're destroying ancient buildings. They have a campaign against makeup. They have a campaign against house pets. They're going to people's houses and hanging their dogs and cats because having a pet is bourgeois. And that every other week they're having this some kind of in the name of continuing Mao's Cultural Revolution, the Gang of Four are just making life unlivable for people in China. And every time the economy starts getting going again, all of a sudden the workers are all called off the job and they have to stop working so they can participate in some campaign, and they have to go beat up and humiliate some people and make their lives miserable. And it's all about punishment. It's all about punishing people. And so every time the economy starts getting going, this happens. So then Deng Xiaoping comes to power, and he arrests the Gang of Four, and immediately all these folks that were previously against all communism, all of a sudden are thinking, okay, there's hope. And I really do believe that Deng Xiaoping took moves that were necessary. China needed to have its economy improve. It desperately needed to improve its economy. And in order to do that, it was necessary to break with, the Gang of Four's policies, that the Gang of Four were opposed to advancing production. And as a result, there you go. Crazy times here. I'm getting some crazy messages. It's a funny thing about doing this job. You get messages from people. You get crazy messages. I'm getting crazy messages from people. If you do this job, you get a lot of crazy messages. People send you messages. But Lady Ravenhair says, the government loves when we do our work for them. Instead of volunteering in soup kitchens, we should be demanding the government provide food stamp benefits, among other things. Well, that's a very good point. A lot of this talk about volunteerism is a way to shrink the public sector. And that's been going on, right? And that, there was a policy, when they talk about welfare to work, a lot of times what would happen when these people were forced to do welfare to work in order to keep getting their welfare, which was less than minimum wage, they would have to go, do the jobs of government workers. Crazy times. They would have to do the jobs of government workers. And furthermore, it's very famous. There's also the very famous, the fact that, there's this thing called the National Service Initiative. And it's something the Democrats have been advocating for a long time. And basically, this National Service Initiative, it would essentially require people to work. It would require basically every young American who graduates from college, they would be required to work 1 year, and it would be either go into the military or do the jobs of government workers for free. And they say, oh, this isn't getting young people involved. But think about it. It's about laying people off. And that's what a lot of this stuff is about. It's about laying people off and getting rid of government employees. And government jobs are very good paying. They've got union protections, binding arbitration, crazy times we've got going on here. But listen, I've been on here for a while, so it's been fun. If anyone's got some, final points, that would be great. But crazy night we've got going on here, yeah, I'm gonna have to, end this live. It's been fun though. Thanks to all you've been on here, Kinky, Richie the Fork, Rory Lennon. China's monitoring and scoring its citizens, free movement of their citizens. There you go. I want to thank you all for being on here. Lady Ravenhair, Budcat7. I want to do more of these lives. I'm having fun, and I'm probably going to do more in the future. And maybe I'll start doing them, this time of night, because this is actually, we got some good numbers here. We've had, well over 40 people watching this entire time. That's pretty cool. We're building a community here. Let me just say I need you, and I need you, yes, you, I need you to be involved in building what we're doing here. We need more people to be involved in this conversation. So with all of that, I will conclude the live here. I want you to all have a wonderful night, and remember, the world may seem like a scary place, but there is hope. There's hope to get beyond all these awful things that we talk about. So keep going. Don't be afraid, and keep spreading the truth. We need people to start talking the way we do. It's a crazy world we live in, but I think things are going to change. I wish you all the best.